would like to ask Brother Adam to come forward.
Good morning. It's always nice to see a pretty packed house so far. Makes things very nice and easy for me. So, the title is, What's the Risk? What's the risk? What is risk? Now, not talking about the board game, which one of my favorite games, always pretty good at that. But no, risk, probability, odds, a gamble, a wager, a chance, likelihood, opportunity. All these things are the risks I'm going to be talking about. When I was a sophomore in college, I took a class. It was called Financial Risk. And I was really looking forward to taking the class. I'd heard good things about the teacher. I still really do like the teacher. I was ready to look forward to all the different types of risks that businesses were going to have to take. Like, should I go for a merger? Should I acquire something? I was really looking forward to that class. And then the first day of class, it ended up being all about insurance. And I do not like insurance at all. But the aspect of insurance and risk, it really goes hand in hand. Because the more insurance you have, or you use insurance to be able to protect yourself, especially for monetary value. You're putting some money down in order to help mitigate any type of bad risk, so that in case something bad does happen, then you'll be compensated. And then it's that aspect of how much money do I want to put down at the start? How likely do I think that something bad's going to happen to me? There's all these different kind of nuances about insurance and financial risk that did start to pique my interest in the class. And like in the subject of risk and taking risks. Because something that I always found really weird is when it comes to taking risks, humans are pretty irrational. We tend to not be smart when taking risks. One of the best instances is the case of the lottery. So the odds of winning the lottery, it's very low. So it's 1 in a million or so to win the overall jackpot, if not worse, or to win some type of money, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, not very likely. But it's that possibility of being able to get something. That is why so many of us, that we go out there, place a $5 ticket for the opportunity, no matter how unlikely it is, for a larger reward. But pretty irrational, considering the likelihood. It's almost never really pays out, and it's almost seems like it's not worth it. If you have a parent, and if you're a young child, if a parent says, "Don't touch a hot stove," the first thing that comes to your mind is, "Let's touch that hot stove." Very irrational. The risk is laid out there. We're told not to do something, and we still want to go out and do it. I've been kind of injured on and off for about 2 months, and with my hip and with my back, and I was talking to my boss on Friday. He's like, "Yeah, you should probably not play basketball, otherwise you're going to risk a long-term injury." And I told him, "Oh well, I'm still going to go out and do it." I think that for those of us that do play sports, I know my dad was told to not play basketball, otherwise he won't be able to walk in a couple years. He still goes out and does it. His knee seems fine. I know Ode in the back, he's supposedly has a concussion or migraine and was told not to play soccer. Still goes on to do it. We're accepting those risks, even though it doesn't make any sense. And we also like to, in regards to risk, especially in regards to like gambling, we like to kind of place money on the underdogs. Because again, in relation to like the lottery, you're putting a little bit of money down, but when you're playing on an underdog, you have the opportunity for an even more reward, which again doesn't make sense. You're being very risky and taking into the this idea of chance. And with gambling in particular, gambling is something which it's very risky. It's not necessarily worth it. And in the end, it does kind of come down to greed and kind of wanting to put money down for yourself just for the thrill of the rush, for money's purposes, which is not what we should be doing with money. We shouldn't be throwing it on ourselves, for like a sports game, or, Odie and I, we have a kind of a small bet on whether or not it's going to snow within the next 2 weeks. We put 50 cents down, so we're pretty high rollers there, but, gambling on something as that, taking bets. And now, is that something that we should be doing with our money? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm going to turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6, 8 through 10. And also, I'm going to skip ahead also and start at verse 17. When 1 Timothy chapter 6, starting at verse 8. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. I'm going to flip ahead to verse 17 through 19 in the same chapter. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. So with this one, money and gambling and wanting to bet on yourself in order to make a profit, it's that love of money. We actually talked about this in our Sunday school class last week about greed. It's that love of money which leads you into temptation, into a desire from yourself and away from a future foundation, which in the second part, where instead of money, we need to be doing good, be rich in good deeds, not rich in necessarily money, playing around with that money in the gambling aspect. And I've always found it kind of odd with gambling, because gambling is kind of in the Bible. It doesn't say gambling, but it's in regards to casting lots. And for the longest time, I still, never really knew what casting lots was, because a lot, I think is like a lot of land. But casting lots, and I was looking up, depending on situation, it's either like you're rolling dice, or like you're picking sticks, or you're flipping a coin. So different kind of options which seemingly have a lot of different variability. And one could say it's a lot of risk in that, for that gambling aspect. And casting lots, it wasn't just used, to say, oh, which of my parents loved me the best, or something kind of silly about that. Casting lots was used for pretty important details. Think about when the apostles were deciding who's going to be next after Judas. They cast lots. When thinking about who was going to be one of the next kings of Israel, they cast lots. Who was it put blame on someone? They cast lots with Jonah going to Nineveh. So they're not necessarily small things. It seems like they're taking a big risk in casting lots. I'm going to turn to Proverbs 16, verse 33. And in Proverbs 16, verse 33, it says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." And I think this is pretty important to realize in regards to casting lots, where it's the hand of man which is physically casting the lots, rolling the die, flipping the coin. But every decision is from the Lord. It's the hand of God that's really guiding the outcome. So it's not necessarily a gamble when God already knows what the solution is. And I think that's very important when it comes to taking risks with gambling and that type of aspect of it. And when we think about the reading that our brother read for us today, the parable of the talents, there were a couple of different options that the servants could have had. They could either take the risk and to try and use that talents, the money that was given to them, to go out and make more, or they could not take any risk, just take it in the hole and expect nothing, no reward from it. And it's this aspect of what decision are we going to do with the talents that were given to us? Talents being money, actual talents. The master has provided us with talents. Are we going to sit idly by, not take any risk? Are we going, and there's a couple different terminologies. So risk averse, that is the idea of not taking any risk, just stepping to the side. Or you can be risk tolerant, where you want to be risky in every decision, look for every opportunity to better oneself. So you can be risk averse and expect nothing with the talents that were given for us. Or we can be risk tolerant and try to go out there and to make a difference. And I think it's also important to, or kind of a fun key aspect that when previously I've gone through, I didn't really realize. With this parable, it's the talents are given to the servant. And the servants are the one that are going out there and risking those talents to get more money. And in the end, they don't even keep that reward. They get a separate reward. But the monetary reward is for their master. I think maybe you'll see where that metaphor is, but with our lives, with our talents that we have, our gifts, or with money we have, any risk that we take, it's not for us. It's for our master, for God. And we have a separate reward for us. That's not the monetary value. But that's the everlasting life for the eternal kingdom. And you think of so many different Bible characters that take risks. And, there's way too many to mention, but some of the first ones that I could come up with, one of the biggest ones was Peter. After he saw Jesus walking on the water, he took the risk of going out and walking on the water. He saw something, he believed he could do it, he went out there, and for the first little bit, he was successful. Then he began to waver, but he still took that risk of going out there in the first place. You have the risk of Abraham, who was told to sacrifice Isaac, the one with whom he was going to have as many descendants as there were stars in the sky. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he took that risk and was willing to sacrifice his only son, and it paid out for him. You have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They knew the risk back in Babylon with King Nebuchadnezzar, where he said, "Bow down to the golden idol, or else get thrown into the fiery furnace." They knew what that risk was. They still took it because they believed, they had faith that God was going to protect them. And even when that risk didn't pay out for them, they were thrown into that furnace, they were still safe because they had faith and trusted. And they knew the risk, and they knew that reward for them. You have Rahab in the book of Joshua. Rahab knew the risk of letting Israelites in. She knew what would happen to her if they found out, but she didn't care. She took that risk. You have Queen Esther, who was talking to her husband, which doesn't seem like much of a risk until you realize her husband was the king, King Xerxes. And back then, in open court, the queen didn't really talk to her husband out in the open like that. And Esther took that risk for her people, something which maybe we can learn from. And with all of these cases, there's so much uncertainty that was going on, fear, danger. All these people, they pushed forward, risking their position, risking their current power, security, comfort, and their future in order for the better of themselves and for their people around them. And so I have a couple different principles I want to mention in regards to managing risk. So that way we know when we should be risky and when not to be, and what to be risky for. My first principle for managing risk, it's faith. When you're taking a risk, you need to believe that it's going to be successful. You need to have faith. Otherwise, why would you even take the risk in the first place if you don't think it's going to go through? So faith, that's key. You need to have belief that it's going to work out. My second principle, it's prudence, being cautious. I can go outside, climb up onto the top of the roof and say to myself, I believe that I will fly if I jump off this building. I have faith that I can do this. I'm going to take that risk and jump. That's where the prudence aspect comes in, and being cautious, to think over the actions and think, maybe not a great idea. There's never been a person that's been able to fly by themselves without the aid of machinery. And I haven't been able to flutter just on my own spare time. I've not been known to fly otherwise. Why would it change now? That's that act of prudence, being cautious, and to know the circumstances, and be rational. And then my third principle, it's duty. Is there a responsibility for us to take that risk for both ourselves and those that we are responsible for? You think back to COVID-19, which, fingers crossed, it's dwindling down, but back in 2020, actually kind of crazy to think about. It's 3 years ago now at this point. And you would hear on the news, wear a mask, get the vaccine to help it so that you don't get COVID-19 and you're able to prevent the risk of COVID-19 affecting your loved ones. Even if it went from maybe you're exposed to someone and you had a 5% chance of getting COVID. If you wear a mask, it goes down to 4.5% chance. Is it worth that little bit of discomfort for however long to wear a mask to decrease that chance by however long? Is it our duty to protect those around us in safety and in health? Some could say yes. And that's where it's that aspect of I need to be able to worry about safety and health of those around me. So what am I going to do about it? Am I going to accept the risk and just, willingly put myself out there? Or am I going to be smart, which I can say I am not smart. I was not a big fan of wearing masks, but a lot of it was, I was young and immature, I can say. Very immature, and I was more worried about the comfort than the actual aspect of doing my duty and protecting those around me. Because we need to have a strong sense of purpose to overcome fear when it comes to risk. If we know what we want to do, it's that faith and duty aspect where we believe it's going to come true and it's our job to do it. Then it's going to overpower any type of fear that we have. Because a great conviction requires a great truth. It's that aspect of faith. And our great truth of what we have, it's all based on our faith. And it's this combination that gives us the courage to face uncertain risks. Now I turn to Ecclesiastes 11, verses 1 through 6. In Ecclesiastes 11, verses 1 through 6. Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you'll find it again. Give portions to 7, yes, to 8, for you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. If clouds are full of water, they pour rain upon the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in a place where it falls, there will it lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in the mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let not your hands be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. When we're taking risks, we can use these principles, faith, prudence, and duty. In the end, we don't necessarily know if it's going to succeed. But we need to try and be as prepared as we can and to be calculated in any risks that we take. Because it's much better to take calculated risk over just being reckless, just rushing in and doing whatever you can because for the thrill of it. We need to be calculated, be going over these 3 steps. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're making a decision to turn right onto oncoming traffic, to take 5 minutes to think about what are the pros and cons, because then people behind you are getting really upset. But it's like the big decisions in our lives, whether you're thinking about moving to having a new job opportunity, if you're going to move across the country. That's when it's the aspect of what do I believe is going to happen, weighing out those pros and cons, what's the duty I have? Because even though we ourselves don't know, God does know for us. And it's how much are we willing to risk ourselves? So I want to turn to Philippians 2, verses 25 through 30. Showing how much should we really be willing to risk ourselves, and especially in regards to doing good works. So that's Philippians 2, chapter from verse 25 through 30. But I think it necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. Welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you cannot give me. So here, with Epaphroditus, it does clearly state out what we need, what should be the standard of us being able to risk. The standard is us being able to risk our life for Christ. That's such a scary thing to think about. I know that there are people here that were put in the position to, literally choose between Christ and death or jail time. And they did end up choosing Christ. They took that risk. Very scary. And when we think about Epaphroditus, how he's physical to the point of death, does that mean that we necessarily need to go all the way to that extreme? Maybe, maybe not. But it's that how far are we willing to go for Christ? In Romans 16, verse 3, when Paul talks about Priscilla and Aquila, it says, they risked their lives for Paul in the churches of the Gentiles. Another instance of risking our lives, or people in the Bible risking their lives to preach the good news. Is that something that we feel comfortable with today? Are we comfortable risking our lives, risking the lives of those around us for the good news? Because we're trusting God. And these people, they trusted God for the opportunity, for that risk, to be his servant. Because we know one risk that we do not want to have, or we want to eliminate all types of risk associated. It's the reward of the kingdom and salvation. That's our end goal. And we need to try and do whatever we can to mitigate that risk, try and eliminate as much risk and uncertainty with it, and to be as prepared as we can. So what are some of those steps in being prepared to help eliminate those types of risks? First one, baptism. Fully committing yourself to Christ. Doing good deeds. Not necessarily just because we were told to do them, but from really having it within our heart, knowing that's how you feel you should be doing. Prayer, when you have questions and want to talk to God. Trusting God in times of despair and need. Reading the Bible so that we can have the knowledge of knowing what's right and what's wrong. all these steps can help mitigate that risk to make it so that we are truly prepared. Because we need to think about, what are we willing to risk for God? And how does this help us to be prepared to enter into the kingdom of God? I want to close with reading back from the opening reading, just one verse this time in Matthew 25, just verse 23. It's Matthew 25, verse 23. This is when the master is speaking to a servant that went out and took the risk and this is his reward. His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness."